right, hello everyone and welcome. I'm Dr. Sylvia and I see most of my class here, some good familiar faces. So thank you all for joining us tonight. I think I see some new faces as well. So I'm looking forward to our first kind of online version of this event. We've done several in the past in various locations around Pittsburgh. And so now we're gonna kind of test out this new method of participation. So what I'm gonna do is I'll probably be sharing my screen to show the PDF for most of the night. I'm also going to put a link to the PDF in the chat in just a second once we get going. So if you want to pull it up on your own, on your device, or have access to it later, I'll have the link so that you can pull that up. So look to the chat window for that in kind of just a couple minutes. I think that's it. I just wanted to say welcome and also make the note that we are recording this session. So you probably see that in the top left section of your screen, but we are recording it and may decide to share it later. We kind of haven't made a final decision on that, but it is being recorded. All right, with that, I think I'm going to turn things over to my class, and I'll go ahead and get that URL for our discussion sheet out to everybody.
Hi, everyone. My name is Megan. So I'm going to begin the discussion here by just laying out a few ground rules for everyone to follow. So firstly, if you're not speaking, would you please mute your microphone for us? I see everyone's mostly done that, so I don't think that will be an issue. And there is a raise your hand function in Zoom. I don't know how many people are aware of this, but if you click on participants at the bottom and you look in the bottom right corner, there's a raise hand button. So we're going to ask that everyone who wants to speak uses that function for the most part. Lastly, just be courteous. Be aware that people here may have different opinions than you do. And we just ask that everyone is nice to each other. That should go without saying, but yeah. And now I'm going to pass this over to Landon. He is also in our class, and he's going to talk about the topic for the day. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. JJ, if you could pull up the screen again on the one sheet. We just wanted to spend a little bit introducing what the topic is before we get into the questions, just so that people are on the same page with their understanding of what the topic is today. So the topic is the ethics of targeted advertisements. So targeted advertisements are used when websites and apps track the online activity of an individual and then tailor advertisements for products and services that that person may have an interest in. This data collection can be done by gathering a user's search history, web pages visited, or location. In the age of social media, targeted advertisements have become a common practice. While this new form of advertising can be very effective in selling a product or getting a brand's name out there, questions arise when discussing the ethics of targeted advertisements. Many issues become apparent when examining this method of advertising, including questions about how certain demographics will be targeted, potential privacy concerns, and the effects this practice may have on democracy. So that's just kind of the definition that we're using of targeted advertisements, because it's kind of a broad category, but that's sort of in a nutshell what targeted ads are, which most people are familiar with. While some may argue that targeted ads can be relatively harmless when people are seeing ads for products that interest them, the mere existence of this type of invasive ad placements can be seen as unethical in and of itself. More blatant ethical issues arise when companies use targeted ads to prey on vulnerable populations, such as marketing alcohol to people who have a search history that indicates that they struggle with alcoholism. How companies store and sell data is also a growing area of concern. Listening devices such as Siri or Alexa also pose a potential invasion of privacy because they are devices that have the capability to store and or share information that's spoken. So in order for targeted advertisements to be more ethical, we must examine the ways in which this business practice is currently falling short. So as that kind of stated, targeted ads more generally can also relate to technology such as Siri and Alexa and any sort of device that is tracking someone's activity as it relates to the types of products or services that they want to purchase. So that's just to get people on the same page of what we're talking about, because like we said earlier, targeted ads look different for different, they serve different purposes. So if we want to get into the first question, I'll hand it over to who is handling the first question.
That would be me. All right. So JJ, I think you actually have a different one sheet because the one that we're using doesn't have the A, B, C, D.
So this is the most recent draft, which we were checking on earlier. So if you can maybe use the one on the screen.
Okay. Yeah, I'll just use that one. All right, apologies. So I'm just going to jump right into the first question. Again, if you would like to start the discussion, please use the raise your hand feature. With technology becoming more and more prevalent in our everyday lives, privacy is a rising concern. Websites track user history and data, devices more commonly have listening features, and companies are able to sell user data. All of this information gathered from a device can help websites develop targeted advertisements. Do you feel that these practices are helpful or harmful to your shopping, to your privacy? And if no one wants to, I guess, trail off of that, I guess I'll just read the others right now. Can you think of ways this data might be used to negatively impact you? Is there any information you wouldn't want companies to collect about you from your search history?
Cameron, someone rose their hand. Sorry to cut you off, but
oh, sorry, I've been scrolling. I did not see that. Okay, Joseph.
Hi, thank you. I really appreciate, by the way, the opportunity to participate in this forum. I think it's a hugely important topic. I'm actually super clear on my concept of this. These things are evil is really the short version of how I would describe it. You could make a perfectly reasonable case, in my opinion, about the benefits that are derived from being able to target advertisements. And were that the only premise that this information was collected for, we might have a discussion here. But I'm going to come out from my end of things foursquare against it, and here's why. We target things without people's permission. We collect things without people's permission. We make it freakishly difficult for people to say no, that they don't want us to collect this information. And there isn't anything about it that's justifiable from my perspective to be able to decide that we want to take this information from people. And there are almost no companies out there that are doing it in a clear and positive way. One quick note, some of you may be familiar with the European privacy regulation. When you go online to a European website and you start to use it, you get, of course, the usual cookies block, and you have to accept this. But when you decline to accept it, it gives you a very straightforward methodology to be able to say, all I want are necessary functional cookies. The US has created an entire, panoply of horrible practices to make it nearly impossible to do that. You'll say, oh, I want to not let my cookies be used. I want to not let my information be used. And then they'll give you, in some cases, dozens, in some cases more than 100 different websites that you must go to individually, not even select individually, but go to individually, search through their privacy regulations and locate the particular aspects that you're not interested in allowing them to collect, thus making it virtually impossible for anybody to opt out of these programs. So I fall down on the side of foursquare against it. And I'll just throw this one more little piece out there. The Nest thermometers that Google bought the company and started making them, when they sold these devices, they included a microphone which was turned off. And then a year after Google sold them, they remembered that they had put microphones in them and started telling people, oh, sorry, we had the ability to monitor your conversation for a year, and we meant to tell you, but we forgot. So I'll be quiet.
Megan, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, I just want to say that I do agree that there are a lot of practices that go on without our knowledge, which is sort of unethical. That's one of the unethical parts about it. My question for you, Joseph, would be, is there anything that companies can do to sort of gain your trust?
To be honest, thank you, Megan. Um, the answer is probably not, but if they wanted to at least try, they could begin to develop transparency in the way that they collect our data. But you will, I mean, I'm actually really interested in this topic, so I spend a lot of time looking at it. There's essentially nobody out there that's coming out and saying, hey, we want to be completely transparent in how we use your data and what we're doing with it. They are literally following the law as little as possible, right? No one's jumping on this bandwagon and saying, hey, we want to be the first to tell you what's happening with your data and how we're using it. They're saying, oh no, we've complied. We've given you the option to opt out of this, but they don't mention that they've done it in such a way, as I say, to make it virtually impossible for a normal human being to opt out of it. It would take hours going to a single website in order to do it. It's insanity. So I think I've kind of, clearly I haven't let it go, but in a sense, I've let it go as far as I now do what I can in a quick and reasonable way to say no. And if I'm going to a European website, I will exercise my right to be, to opt out, so to speak. But in my experience at this time, I don't know how to avoid it. They would have to decide intentionally to be more transparent. And in my experience, I'm simply not seeing that for all intents and purposes from anywhere. I'm not seeing that at all.
Has anyone else had a similar experience? Like to chime in on their experience?
I guess I'll add a little bit to that. I think Joseph, you raised some really good points, especially in terms of comparison to what the EU is doing. And they're a little closer to kind of the spirit of opt-in that was meant for these kinds of practices. And the kind of the only thing that you said that I might take a little bit of space between is that we don't give permission. And while I agree with you in spirit of what you said there, I think from the legal standpoint, we give permission when we agree to the terms of services of most sites, which by either creating an account or even using them in many cases, we kind of agree to. And so I think that's a very technical point. And again, like I think in spirit, I definitely agree with you that that's not much of a choice, really, because it's either you use it and agree to everything or you don't get to use it. And so I think that's problematic, but I would kind of just make that small distinction. And that's interesting because that's kind of with the EU giving more choices for like where you can use which data of yours they can use and which you can't, kind of gets closer to the spirit of that. And it really did take regulation, which is I think part of what you're speaking to kind of in the second portion of what you're saying, that there aren't a lot of companies that are voluntarily doing this. It's taking kind of government action to mandate these changes. The other thing I would add though, just trying to think through the other side of it, is from the big data side, one of the things that's tough for any company to do is to be super clear about how they will use your data. Because in the age of big data, notice and consent is ideally supposed to tell you every way your data will be used. But with big data, people are using it to find correlations that they wouldn't have expected to find. And so when we get into that area, it's kind of hard to tell people ahead of time how the data is going to be used. And I think that's not an excuse. I think there's a lot of things that could be done better, but that is a complexity or maybe a nuance that I think we should all take into account as well.
And if I may, I would accept that as perfectly reasonable. I mean, that I agree that there are unforeseen potentials that companies can develop. But my concern is when you have literally truckloads of websites that were exporting your data to Facebook, even if you didn't have a Facebook account, without ever saying, "Mother, may I?" those of you that are not nearly as old as I am, by the way, Mother May I was a child's game when people of my age were small.
Dr. Moody, I think I see your hand up.
Dr. Moody. Okay. Hey, JJ, everybody. Good to hear from you all. So on this day, when we're all gathered through a computer platform or a phone platform to speak to everybody, and we're also trading data right now through this mechanism, my question is also, what's necessarily changed? We're discussing technology, but one of the things that happens when you study social media is that you realize that it's a set of practices that's then converted to technological communication through electronic media. And so my question is, what are some of the practices that came before which were used to gather data in ways that we did not know about? So for example, Mr. Lyman, you mentioned going to Europe and having privacy rights whenever you search online. Yet if I walk outside in London, I'm recorded at cameras every step that I go, and that's collected through closed circuit TV. And I have no way of opting out of that because I cannot apparate anywhere. So I have to figure out a way to move through society in different ways. So technology is, I don't necessarily agree with that statement that technology's evil. Technologies are tools. What we do with it is more deterministic of this. But I think that the conversation is, how do we necessarily get the chance to opt in? And overall, have we ever had the chance to opt in or opt out fully?
I would say you're spot on. And please, I did not say technology was evil. I said the use of technology in this fashion, I feel, is evil. I think companies do it because they do it deliberately. They're not doing it by accident, is just my contention there. They're with full faith and credit and full knowledge of what they're doing. They're collecting our information, they're selling our information, they're utilizing our information, and they're doing it without being transparent. And that's what I think is evil. To go directly to your comment about if you're in London and you're on CCTV, by the way, just so everybody knows, if you're in London, you're on CCTV someplace. They're the most watched group of people in the world. Even China takes lessons from how to monitor their population from the UK. But kind of the point, right? I mean, we hear the expression slippery slope, but these are where we're headed, right? We've gotten to the point now where I could not be talking to you on a Zoom platform. I couldn't be doing my job. I'm a trainer, a business trainer, without a Zoom platform, without giving them permission to use this data to collect, to facially analyze things. But when we don't know what we're getting into, I'll give you a minor example. TikTok. TikTok is a company it's one of the most, as I'm sure you know, is one of the most widely used pieces of widely used apps on the planet at this moment. 2 years ago, it was the most downloaded app in the world. But it's a company that's owned by ByteDance, which is a Chinese company, which up until recently, it may still be doing it, was running all of their stuff through servers in China, where they were using AI and facial recognition technology to keep track of everybody, which a lot of companies do. But I'm concerned when governments have so much access to so much data, and corporations, it doesn't matter, because corporations are now the size of governments, that they have all of this data, but they don't have any restrictions on them to speak of. No significant restrictions are placed on data except health data, and even that's being lifted in the middle of the coronavirus epidemic. So with few restrictions about what they can do, I get a little concerned about where we're headed towards. And in the past, you mentioned what could we do? What did they do before? Nothing like this existed on this scale. You simply couldn't collect information about 3 billion people, right? Facebook is utilized by nearly 2.7 billion people on a fairly consistent basis. This sort of ability to collect and manipulate data didn't exist to this extent until quite recently.
So I'm curious if anyone wants to maybe think through the other side, because a lot of my friends will kind of say they really like targeted ads. It helps them find things they want. I hear this from students sometimes, and also kind of the argument that, well, if I'm not doing anything wrong, why should I worry about this kind of data that's collected? So I'm wondering if that resonates with anyone, if anyone's feeling that, even in the context of these concerns that are being raised. Landon, I did see you have your hand up.
I was just gonna kind of comment on the point that I feel like this targeted advertisement discussion kind of can go back to just advertising in general and the ethical problems there. I feel like it just really amplifies it. So like, 20, 30 years ago, you would get advertisements on your TV and they would use, emotional manipulation type techniques, but your relationship to your TV is very different from your relationship to your phone or your computer. Like that's a big part of your life, and it has so much information in it that not only will it target what your interest is in, but it can see who you're friends with, what they're interested in, and kind of shift reality in that way. So I feel like the issue of targeted advertisement is almost on that slippery slope kind of continuum, where as we progress with this technology, the potential for it to become more and more apparent what the issues are. I feel like it's highlighting the issues, but it's also highlighting, some of the benefits. Like you had said, people are seeing advertisements for things that they actually might want to buy. They're not sitting through commercials that they don't care about. At least it's engaging. So I feel like it can amplify it in both ways. It just has to do with, what are the restrictions on that? And if there are no restrictions, the potential for it to have a lot of negative consequences is a lot higher.
Jay, I think I see you raising your hand.
Yeah, I was just back to the privacy. Like we always, I got in this conversation with Dr. Moody too. Like we have always been taught, like, don't share this information, don't share that information on a paper version, right? And then the internet came along, and these types of things keeps happening, and companies are fined for data breaches and all of that. But even the government, they have breaches in their security systems that allow our data out. And with these fines that are posed, do you anticipate anything changing because of fines? I mean, earlier, a couple of years ago, or actually last year, Facebook was fined $5 million for a data or sharing information. So how do you see that happening or changing things as it progresses?
May I comment?
Please.
That's about 4.5 minutes worth of advertising revenue from Facebook. So I'm going to go with not going to have a big effect. I think when you get right down to it, it's almost disingenuous of our government when they impose fines for this. And you're absolutely right. I mean, look at the government, the most secure organization in the world. Honest to God, the most data secure organization in the world is the NSA. Who got hacked? The NSA. The Office of Personnel Management lost 22 million records of classified documents. So this is like in individuals' records and their background checks. 22 million human beings that work for the government, their information went to the Chinese government over a period of several years. So if the NSA can be hacked, if OPM can be hacked, if Experian, you only have one job, keeping your credit customers' data intact. If these guys, literally, this is all they do. They just figure out a way to collect this data and protect it. And they fail horribly. And I use that word on purpose because they don't just fail because of some technical glitch. There's almost always somebody that just before this happened, or a year before, or 2 years before these data breaches take place, that looked at the system and said, hey, there are problems here that you guys should probably pay attention to. The NSA was warned that they had problems. Experian was told less than 2 months before its data breach that there was a problem. Sony, who was one of the biggest corporate hacks at the time by North Korea, was informed about a dozen times that they had data security problems. Experian, the same, I mean, over and over again. But these companies continually ignore the threats because even though they take a PR hit, Experian did, Sony did, and others, I mean, there's no serious punishment. Facebook doesn't even know where some of its data went, and it ends up at Cambridge Analytics. And, bad Facebook, don't do that anymore. And that's the end of the discussion. So, yeah, I don't see it getting better in a hurry.
If I could actually just jump in there real quick. So one of the things that I want to point out is how many of us use Uber or any ride-sharing services, and it breaks a mantra that my folks had whenever we were adopting the internet 20 years ago, which was don't tell strangers where you live, and don't give out your credit card information. And now I'm using Uber, and I'm telling strangers where I live, where I want to go, and I'm giving them my money to do with it what they will. And yet I'm totally fine with it in a lot of ways because the mechanisms by which Uber operates are so firmly integrated into society and culture that in some ways they are necessarily inescapable. Now, with regard to targeted advertising and privacy, in some ways, I can see it as a positive. For example, let's take the issue of gender and names, just as a hypothetical here. If you have a person who's named Kelly, in the simple gender binary, they could be identified as male or female. You don't necessarily know. And so a person named Kelly might receive products that are marketed to them that are not supposed to be marketed to them as they want in there. So that's a uniform positive because I don't think that we're necessarily talking about it there. But at this scale and at this level, you also have to ask the question of, can you necessarily opt out? I mean, at some point, given the level of scale at which this is integrated, is it trust or acquiescence that we're looking at this point? Is it necessarily like an agreement, or am I just saying at the end, I love Big Brother, like Winston Smith?
So, I mean, this actually might be a good point to transition into question 2, because I think there could be some overlap there in terms of thinking about not just targeting, but what already existing laws might come into play. So if somebody wants to introduce question 2, we can go ahead and move there.
Yes. Question. When could a company's tendency to target people of a specific age, group, race, or gender cross the line and become discriminatory? For example, Facebook has faced lawsuits for allowing advertisers to target specific demographics on their platform for employment or housing opportunities. It may seem harmless for a company to search for those employees under a certain age, but at what point does this become discriminatory?
Yes, Jay. Jay had his hand up, I saw. Jay Troy.
Yeah, that was from before. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay. And then I saw somebody else that had their hand up as well. I'm pretty sure. Nope.
Yeah, I was just gonna kind of say like that again sort of makes the same point of like, I don't know if targeted ads specifically or intentionally do these sort of things, but I think it's another instance where an issue that was already there is becoming more prevalent, like, you know, advertisements and placement of fast food restaurants or liquor stores are often in low income areas or often in rural areas, or, you know, they're specifically targeted because that's the market. And I think that can carry over to targeted advertisements as well, except now it can be so much more specific than just a low income area or a rural area or a disenfranchised community that they're going to say, okay, well, let's put liquor stores here, or let's put no, healthy food options. Now it's so much more readily accessible that the second you open up your phone, you're going to be getting those messages. You don't even have to leave your house. So again, I think there's a lot of issues that come with it, but I think it's also just amplifying existing problems that have been, in place for a while.
So, I mean, I think one of the questions that comes from that then is like, because we do have existing laws to address these pre-existing issues, like, are those enough to address those, or is it unique in a way that needs kind of its own approach? I think I saw Rebecca raise your hand.
Yeah, hi. So I work in a nonprofit, and we do targeted ads for our events and everything. So we specifically go into not necessarily age groups, but sometimes we're looking for families that are affected by autism, people that are willing to reach out to the autism community. So, I mean, yeah, there's probably there's a gray area, of course, especially autism as a health area. So you have to be careful on that too. But yeah, so I mean, we use targeted ads, Instagram, Facebook, Google. We tried Twitter. It's not really a great platform for it, but I mean, even then, we're going in and we're trying to find the moms and the dads, those stay-at-home parents, those that are looking into therapy centers, to see who we can attract to our events and then get fundraising efforts out of them after that.
Thanks for bringing that up, because I think that's a really good kind of counterexample in some ways to the things that we've been talking about. And we didn't actually do it this time, but in the past we have done targeted advertising for some of the events that we've held. We put them on Facebook and various other things. So based on area where they lived, as well as like interests that might relate to philosophy or ethics or the particular topics. So I mean, I think that's a good reminder that there are organizations that exist not just for making a profit, that might make use of these tools that are created by other organizations, which I think adds a really strong nuance to that conversation. Joe?
I just want to I maybe add a little clarity to from my perspective. I'm not opposed to targeted ads at all. I'm not opposed to any of the things that we're discussing here. What I am fundamentally opposed to is when they are imposed upon us rather than it is something that we accept by choice, right? I think Rebecca's opportunity to focus on people who might be looking for certain resources, this is like one of the huge benefits of what we're talking about. But if I have chosen to be part of that, right? If you give me the opportunity to opt out, if you give me the opportunity to say, hey, I'm looking to connect to other people for a particular medical condition, or I'm looking to connect to other people who like old bookstores, or I'm looking for these things. So yes, I want to participate in them. But my concern is that because of the way we've created the system, where we don't actually have to ask anybody, or we do it in such a way that it's completely unclear what we're asking for and what we're going to do with it, that there's not a lot of, there aren't a lot of barriers to what can be done with this information. And then there's not a lot of punishment for companies that misbehave with it. We see this over and over again, and my concern is that what we're seeing is ultimately kind of the tip of the iceberg, and we're going to see this continue to move in potentially negative directions. I mean, look at the power that states have taken into their own hands as a result of COVID-19 situation, right? Some of the, for instance, China used GPS tracking. So they used your phone's GPS to figure out where you'd gone, and then they used the GPS location of other people's phones around you to figure out who you came in contact with. Now, you could make an argument that GPS tracking here was necessary, but my question is, What else will it be necessary for? And now that you've given people the ability to do this, what will they decide in their own little world, in their own little purview, is their right or their opportunity to continue to use this, and not only use it, but expand it and say, oh, well, maybe we want to do this for people who want to borrow money. So, high interest payday loans now can go directly after people who might not need them, but who might be thinking about it, and nail them using, as somebody else mentioned, exactly the same techniques that advertisers have been using for years. Some of you may be unaware of this, but it was actually common years ago that movie theaters would blow in the smell of popcorn into the movie theater so people would buy more of it, until the Federal Trade Commission said that was a bad idea.
I think it's interesting you brought in kind of the recent changes, especially with tracking COVID-19. I've seen recently that actually Connecticut was rolling out drones for monitoring as well. So, I mean, this is getting a little tangential maybe to advertisements, but I think that type of technology crossover is linked. And it was able to do heat sensing, so looking for people that had fevers, but it would also scope if people were staying 6 feet apart. And so like you could see through its computer vision, like green circles around people who were social distancing enough and red circles that weren't. Last I had seen, I think there was kind of enough uproar that they have rolled back using those and decided not to. But it seems pretty clear that there's a desire to, and I think that's what you were getting at with kind of what you were saying, is how are these going to be expanded and used in different ways. I see Kyle with your hand up. Before I throw to you, is there anyone else who hasn't gotten a chance to jump in yet that would like to say something? Of course, you don't have to, but we always want to make sure we're pausing and giving you that chance if you're interested.
Yeah, I get paid to talk, so somebody else feel free to jump in.
All right, Kyle.
So, first of all, apologies for the video. This is a contentious topic, so here's a picture of my dog to calm everybody down. Second of all, the one thing that we need to think about is that this discriminatory practice is nothing new. Even before and even after the signature of the Civil Rights Act, African Americans in this country have faced widespread discrimination in any number of economic realities, whether it's buying a house or whether it's any zoning and home valuation in there. So we're seeing how demographics can be discriminated against regularly. We see that with advertising. There we go. All right, you're done. And then we see that with ultimately with health too. My big question is, how about would our insurance companies' life and health change any regulations or change our coverage if we're more likely to be exposed to COVID-19 based on our occupation, or if we have ever, been exposed to the virus and become infected by it? So that's one thing that we have to think about. We're dealing with, as Donald Rumsfeld would say, unknown unknowns. And so we have to think about that as we apply this ethical thought. Is there are companies that are already doing these practices, as have been made perfectly clear. The thing that we necessarily need to do is to think about ways that if we don't want to, we can necessarily push back. In some ways, they call this woke capitalism. I have a huge amount of problems with that thought and the ideology that specifically speaks about it. But it also gets to the point that we're talking about this through targeted advertising, because capital and capitalism is essentially the platform through which all of this operates. So this is a bigger discussion about the motivations and ideologies behind targeted advertisements. I like to receive advertisements for men's clothes. Clearly, I get advertisements for dog food, okay? But I'm also getting things that are specifically tailored to me. So many of those who are watching and listening in have never necessarily even had the chance to opt out. Mr. Lyman, you clearly pointed out that there's a structure set in place where people get the chance to opt in normally, but so many of people on this call were born right around the time that the Patriot Act itself was signed. They've lived their whole lives pretty much under the Patriot Act and later PRISM. And so governmental regulation means that targeted advertising goes on track. It can be set up in a way that says, oh, we're surveying for the good of the country. PRISM necessarily also means like we can aggregate your data and sell it to companies just so we understand the geography of Massachusetts, New England, whatever. So it's hard for some people to extricate that from the bigger discussion that we have going on. And I'd like us to also thinking about this, not just with COVID-19, because it should be a wake-up call to how our information is used, but also the fact that right now we're all using electronic platforms, all of us, including this one, to communicate with each other. And I don't know how many of us actually read the end user license agreement, but we're now transmitting that information fully through here. At this point, is it necessarily discriminatory, or is it just something like you knew what you were getting into? And I'll take the answer off the air.
Well, I think let me throw this back to my students real quick, just to see, because I mean you've kind of been really digging into this for the past few weeks, and in light of everything that's been said, I'm kind of curious to hear where you stand, and then also maybe after we hear a little bit of that, I think we can probably have time for maybe one or two more questions if we wanted to move on after we kind of wrap up this part of the discussion.
So I think the main issue being discussed here is that we aren't necessarily opting in to receiving these kinds of targeted ads. And I would say that even deciding to use Facebook or deciding to use any sort of online platform where we see the ads is us opting into it. And I'm wondering if anyone who sees that as an issue thinks that they have the right to sort of use these platforms without the advertisements.
I personally don't mind the advertisements on Facebook. I feel like sometimes they could be like very useful, like as we were saying before, with all that. But like I could be searching something, like, have a general question I could be searching up on Google, and then moments later when I'm on Facebook, I see something similar to what I was searching for. So I feel like yes, it is a good idea for like it to be popped up on my Facebook feed, but for almost like half the entirety of my page be flooded with advertisements of unnecessary things, of things that I've already bought or things that like I was thinking of buying and stuff like that. That's like I agree with it, but I also like it's sometimes it could be too much.
Rebecca, I saw you.
Yeah, I was just thinking the same thing as Megan, like adding yourself on social media, stuff like that. I mean, my aunt used to work in, she's retired now, but she used to work in the Boston court system. So she like avoids social media like it's a plague. Whereas her husband, my uncle, has social media so he can connect with all of us since we don't live in the same state anymore. And I feel like, I mean, for me, I personally am trying to avoid TikTok like really badly, even though it's like really funny sometimes. But like, I don't need my information in their system. Whereas I'm on Facebook, I'm on Instagram, which is the same company these days. So you kind of have to like take the short end of the straw if you really want to be on these platforms to talk to people. You're kind of already putting yourself there. I mean, it's the same thing. You might be looked at weird for having like a flip phone, but it's one way to like protect yourself instead of getting a smartphone. So, I mean, by making those purchases, you're also putting yourself in that situation saying, yeah, my information is going to be out there.
I think I was just going back to Kyle's point about how it really is kind of a systemic issue. Like the way that I see it is with these fines in place, like that really does nothing. It gives the illusion of some sort of accountability, but $5 million to a multi-billion dollar corporation, they're going to be making more off the ads anyway, that paying a fine doesn't matter to them. I mean, it's the same with things like, charging Walmart for dumping waste in the environment. It's like, what type of punishment is it when it really has no effect? They can even pay someone to spin the PR stuff. So when it comes to targeted ads, I just feel like it's really wrapped up in just how we function as a society. And I think that the idea of just getting like this dopamine hit every time you do online shopping and seeing ads keeps us so wrapped up in social media. It kind of feeds into that that need to buy something in order to feel something. And it's not even a conscious thing. It's just something that happens, because buying things that you like makes you feel good in the short term. And when companies can just keep sending that out, at least on television, it's like there's only a certain amount of ad minutes per hour of television. They don't have that online. Even in a 10-minute YouTube video, pretty sure you can put like 5 ads on it. I mean, if you did, people probably wouldn't watch it, but the option is there if you really want to push your product. So I think that it can be used for good, that there is, targeted ad stuff that I do enjoy, but the ability to we're not even opting in. We can't opt out. If you have a cell phone, your cell phone provider has all that information. Even a few years ago, I remember people were nervous to put their credit card information. If I was going to buy something online, I would have to buy like a Visa gift card because my parents would be like, oh, I don't want my credit card number in there. Now it's like you go to a drive-through and show them your phone and they scan it. It's all so connected that it's weird for a minute. We have the fingerprint scanner and now it scans your face. And for a day or two, I was like, oh, that's kind of weird and invasive, but it just becomes normal that we don't even stop to think like, wow, this has changed so much in the past 5 years even.
I guess that gets me thinking because I mean, the internet evolved in a particular way and it could have been otherwise. And I mean, one of the alternative models would be where we pay for more. So like, would you pay for using things like Facebook and TikTok if we just got rid of all of the data collection and advertising that we're done on them? Would you be willing to take that step?
If I may, this has been my position for a long time, that nothing is free, right? And we do have to choose: are we going to pay with money or are we going to pay with our information? I mean, it's one or the other, right? So like, for example, I pay for my email. I doubt anyone else here pays for their email. I pay for my email because it's the alternative, right? I mean, we have to pay for everything online, and it's it's one or the other.
And
If I have
oh, sorry, go ahead.
it's just gonna be really quick. I know you raised your hand and I didn't. I wanted to ask Joe a question about that. Does paying for your email, does that exempt you from like seeing ads or having them have your information? Specifically, like what does paying for your email get you?
Well, it for me, it gets me out of all these free email services. They do, like for example, Google. It's not scanning the contents of your email necessarily for surveillance purposes, but it is scanning it for keywords for advertising purposes. Absolutely. I made this particular change just for some context after going to a Cato talk in which the speaker basically said these things that are being used for advertisement, they're not being used for government analysis, but all the government would have to do is plug into it and it would all be there for them, right? We don't know what the future looks like. I'm a historian, so I can especially say this, right? Like we don't know what the future is going to look like. And so, being able to sort of think about different possibilities sort of had me say, that's one thing that I want to keep that I don't want to be being scanned, because maybe it seems harmless to be scanned for ads, but we really don't know how this information will be used in the future.
Yeah, as a fellow historian, I would 100% agree with everything you just said. And Proton Mail, probably the email that you use because it's purchasable. Great alternative. Will we pay a few dollars to use it? Personally, I'm okay with paying some money for it. I have subscriptions to newspapers that have a paywall. I pay for them because the content is important. I subscribe to magazines because the content is important, right? I pay for, God knows what else collects in this house right now. But because what they say is so important that I'm willing to pay money for it. But the essence is, when it's free, we're the product, right? I mean, that's the bottom line. When the product is free, you're the product. And I'm okay with that. And again, these things aren't, I don't think there's anything inherently bad in and of themselves. But when you can't control how these things are used, and when you can't see how these things are used, and when you have no say over what's going to happen to your data, I think that creates a different situation. And I think part of it is, and this goes back to something that Kyle was saying, the capitalist method, right? It's never once occurred to these companies that this was something that we should have talked to human beings about before we jumped into this. Because the capitalist way is, no, you said you accepted the terms and conditions. Whether you read them or not is irrelevant. You accepted them. So now that's the deal, right? You accepted the terms and conditions. I can do whatever I want with, 1 million people's worth of data. And, but we don't even know what's happening with it. HART, which is Homeland Advanced Recognition Technology, the new facial recognition system that the DHS is putting together, Department of Homeland Security, has been using state licensed databases. They don't even need your picture. They've already got it from the states that took your picture to give you your license. But I'm pretty sure that when anybody on this meeting got their license, there was nothing in it that said, yeah, I don't mind if the Department of Homeland Security uses my picture as part of their facial recognition technology. I'm pretty sure that wasn't on it when I signed mine, and I doubt it was on anybody else's when they signed theirs. And that's the kind of thing that I think is, as Joe pointed out, is the unknown unknowns, right? We don't know what they're going to do next. So how can we say we support it or don't, and want to be part of it or don't want to be part of it? We don't really have the ability to say no.
John, I think I saw your hand up next.
Yeah, so I guess you mentioned earlier that this kind of like alternate internet where things cost more and we paid per site. Assuming that would develop into something where we have social media to the same extent we do now, wouldn't that kind of create a socioeconomic class difference and caused kind of a large barrier there? We would kind of really close off the poor or middle class even, and all these would differentiate, and I think we would very much segregate those ways.
This is exactly why I don't tell people they should pay for their email, even though I do, and I'm very serious about that, because I'm aware this is a choice I've made, right? But it's not a choice necessarily that everyone can make.
There are sites too, and I think it's less common than it used to be in some ways, that will kind of try to thread the needle between those two. Because certainly, yeah, I think those socioeconomic divides that you brought up are extremely important to think about. But one of the models I've seen is a site that will be, the core features are free for everyone to use, but people who would like to pay for it can get kind of additional features that can do other things that aren't vital to being able to use the product, right? So I'm just trying to think of one example. A long time ago, LiveJournal was an early blogging platform, and it was free for everyone to use, and everybody could have 3 user pictures. But if you wanted more than that, right, a paid account would allow you to have up to 10, among other things as well. And then, so the people who were really invested in the site and did pay for it would in some ways kind of supplement the people who are using it for free. Many sites that use that these days, the free version is kind of so limited it's not worth it. So I don't know that that balance is there. But it seems like that would at least be something that could potentially be explored in more depth.
But in terms of the socioeconomic problem, I would say that the socioeconomic problem exists with or without this problem. And really what you're saying is that privacy becomes, it's like a privacy tax, right? Some people can choose to opt out of it because of socioeconomic reasons, whereas everybody else may not have that choice. They still have access to the platform, but they don't have the choice to protect their privacy like others do. And I still see that as a socioeconomic problem. I'm also just reminded on this question of many years ago, the chain emails that you used to get saying, sign this petition because Facebook is going to start charging or whatever, right? And it was sort of the panic thing that people would share on their Facebook walls, contact Mark Zuckerberg to make sure that you keep Facebook free. You can see that sort of fear from people that they might actually have to start paying for this service, when the reality is there's no way Facebook would ever jeopardize their income model by imposing a subscription fee, right? I mean, like, they're making money off of the fact that it's free, and it's never really a part of the conversation.
Yeah, I mean, I was just saying about like the idea of opting in. That's almost hard to do too when it's so coercive. Like with the driver's license, like what are your choices? You either opt out, but you don't get to drive, or you opt out of, using your email, but you don't get to communicate, or, things like that. You can say, well, you don't have to have a cell phone, but if you want to exist in the world and be employed and have the same opportunities as everyone else, you kind of do need to use social media in a lot of aspects. You do need to have internet, the ability to use the internet, to be able to, people shopping online who might live in rural areas that literally don't have access to certain things. So the idea of a choice is kind of an illusion when the choice is you either do it or you don't have nearly as much opportunities as everyone else. And I think it's most apparent in things like, getting your driver's license or anything like that, where it's like, you need that to function in a society. Yeah, you could, ride your bike or take a bus, but like, that's not really, it's not an actual choice. It's the illusion of it.
So we are winding down on time. I have kind of scrolled down to the rest of the questions. Is there anything we really want to bring up as we're kind of winding down and running out of time that we want to touch on? Yeah.
Yeah, so I saw the first question between traditional commercial or billboard advertising. I think a lot of people might be like, oh, I remember that commercial, but then they don't know what the product was. Like, it could have a catchy jingle and that'll stay in your head for a little while, or you'll see a flashy billboard on the highway. Whereas the targeting ads, it's something that's going to keep popping up, and you're going to see it. You go to YouTube, there's an ad for a hair gel. You go onto Facebook, it's there again. So there's definitely, I think, more opportunity for a sale when it comes to the targeting advertising on personal devices versus a commercial or a billboard. I also think that a lot of times advertising, especially the agencies, the personal device ads are so much cheaper than television commercials and billboards. So if a company's trying to save some money, they're going to go online instead of doing something physical, because they'll save some money and probably get more sales, but they'll also get more hits on what they're trying to accomplish.
That's a good point. And just to kind of connect that to our for further thought section, one of the big things about any kind of online ads or individually targeted ads is that they can be kind of tested for effectiveness. in a much more nuanced way than traditional ads can. So for traditional ads, we might have like focus groups, or we might look at like codes that are used. But for online ads or other very individualized targeting, we can have what's called A/B or multivariate testing, where we try different versions of the same ad and can very quickly see like how much engagement there was, how many click-throughs they got. And you can continue to fine-tune that to increase how likely people are to interact with it. And this is something I've written about in the past, and I think this is probably an unpopular department in terms of, or opinion in terms of marketing and advertising, but I think a lot of classical ethical theories would probably see that as a form of manipulation, whereas it's kind of what everybody does now, right? So I think there's some tension there in those practices and ethics.
And Rebecca, I think what you said is critically important. You said the targeted ads work better. Turns out they really do. I can spend less money and get better results by targeting my ads, which tells us clearly that there is literally no possibility that any of the things that we've been talking about from the beginning of this conversation are going away anytime soon. They are simply too effective.
And I think that goes with pretty much anything that a company finds that makes them money. As long as it makes them money and is easy to do, I don't think that, unless the law steps in vigorously, they're not going to stop doing it.
And I think that's a good point for us to think about, right? Is if we want change, where is that change going to happen from? And I mean, there's probably only a couple ways we might see that. And that's if there's just massive deplatforming of people stopping using certain sites and services, or if there are legal changes that require kind of changes to the practices that businesses are using. And I think both of those are tough. Those are big hurdles to kind of get over, but they are both doable. And I think we talked about it a little bit earlier in the conversation, but what the EU has done in terms of data regulation is definitely in the right realm of at least the direction that we probably should be pointed if we're going to have more ethical practices here. But it's something that I think there has to be widespread support for. And so, I mean, I think that's why having a discussion like this is important, because again, like this is something I talk about a lot, whether it's with classes or people I know, probably drive them crazy. But that continually hear too, that phrase, like, well, if I'm not doing anything wrong, why should I worry about this? And so I think spreading awareness of what some of those worries might be could be important, and kind of moving the bar on what regulation like that could look like as well. So I think the awareness aspect is an important part of it. So I think I see everybody's going to rush and get Proton Mail and start using DuckDuckGo now. Is that right?
100%.
Proton Mail is a perfect example. There's a free version. It's very small, utilitarian, but it's free. It's encrypted end to end. If you lose your password, you've lost your email. You can't get it back. But it's, and then there's the, monthly payments and so forth, and you can get lifetime, you can get all kinds of things. But it's a useful alternative, right? We sometimes think, mistakenly so in my opinion, that without them, we can't exist. But there are often options that are useful to us.
Any questions that anybody has about anything that's come up tonight? Anything kind of lingering on your mind that you're not sure of or want to know more about? All right, well, we are past our 1 hour point, which was the length we had scheduled this for. So I think we can kind of wrap up. I want to thank everybody for joining us. I think we had a good discussion, raised some really interesting points, considered things from several different angles. And I appreciate everyone that joined us and contributed to our discussion. And I'll just give a quick pitch because since things got shifted around with us not being on campus this semester, things kind of got contracted a little bit. So my other group is actually presenting this Thursday at 3 p.m. and they're going to be presenting on free speech and censorship, and then ethical analysis of that. So if you're interested in joining us, we'll be doing that Thursday at 3, and I'll be advertising kind of through all the same channels that we did for this. So you can look out for the link there. So thank you again, everyone. I really enjoyed it. I'm glad we got to try something different and still come together, albeit virtually, to talk about these important topics.
Yeah, seriously, thank you guys. I know our group was not expecting this many people to show up. When we got here, we were texting our group chat like, oh my God, there's a lot of people. So thank you for making the discussion easy and fun. Actually, I really enjoyed listening to what everybody had to say. So thank you.
And I would say thank you for, as usual, putting out a great idea for people to talk to. I think it's such a big deal that somebody hosts a forum like this and provides opportunities for people, even if it's just to listen, right? Even if it's just to hear about to hear the conversation. So thank you very much.
Yeah, and thank you to all the students in my class. You did a fantastic job pulling all this together, especially in the context of not being able to meet in person and pull it together like we normally would. So outstanding work doing that from a distance.
I really enjoyed the whole event. I'll definitely be here for Thursday.
All right, well, thank you. Hope you all have a good evening and stay well.